Ready to go.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. Again, my name is Val Swisher, and I am the CEO of Content Rules. And I am here today with Torsten Machert, who's a senior consultant from Congree Language Technologies. Congree is a very important partner of Content Rules. And today we are going to talk about consistent structure equals consistent content. And I'm going to talk first about why linguistic quality is important, why it's important to standardize your terminology and your grammar and your style. And we're going to talk about how we automate this and how we accelerate the authoring process. And about halfway through, I will give the floor and mic to Torsten, and he will go through his slides, and then we'll take some questions at the end. So I'm going to put up the slide. That's yes, I think we all know this by now, but it is the obligatory, what are the benefits of structured authoring slide. So we know these things, I do believe. Structured authoring makes everything easier. It's easier to find, easier to manage, easier to write. We spend our time focusing on our content. We don't worry about focusing on our format or what the end product is going to look like. It allows us the opportunity to create more content and more valuable content. And obviously, as we also know, it reduces that constant reinventing the wheel of content that's already been written. And organizations know where their content is and what their content contains, rather than having a million versions of the same, almost kind of, but not exactly the same content. I started alluding to this yesterday, and today I really get to talk in more detail about it. When you are in a structured environment, the quality and the consistency of your content is more important than ever. And I said it yesterday, and I'll say it again today. I do not understand companies who are using structured authoring, but are not properly managing their terminology, their style, and their grammar. It doesn't make sense to me. The lines just do not match. So, in order to be successful, when you mix and match topics and you want to reuse topics from one output to another, the topics must have consistency. They must be consistent, again, terminology, grammar, style, voice, tone. If your quality is poor, then all of your topics that you're putting together are going to have poor quality. Poor quality content is a negative thing. There's lots of negative impacts that it has. Everything from readability to translatability to how people see your brand, sales, and of course, how many calls your support department gets because they had a problem with the content. When we're successful, we can take topics and we can put them together how we need to, and it looks like one person wrote the whole thing. That's success. It's not successful if I put a bunch of topics together and it looks like 17 different people wrote the topics. That's not successful. So why are we going to standardize our terminology? Well, funny you should ask. So many reasons. Lately, my topic of choice has been personalized experience. Again, to mix and match content successfully, we all have to call things by the same term. It lowers the cost of developing the content while simultaneously improving the quality. It lowers the cost of translation while simultaneously improving the quality of translation. It lowers the costs all the way around. It speeds your time to market, and it makes your lawyers very happy. So standardizing terminology is really important. During the development process and the editing process, if you use standard terms, you save time. If we all call things by the same name, then we don't have to decide what word I'm going to use. And I don't have to spend a lot of time looking for synonyms. I'll go back to something I've said many times in the past. When I was in elementary school, I had an English teacher, it was called language arts, who taught us that we should never use the same word to mean the same thing. We needed to show off our mastery of vocabulary. So we needed to use the most complicated multisyllabic words we could, and we always needed to change them up. This was not the right message for those of us who went on to become technical communicators, because it's a problem all around. So we save time developing the content, we save time editing, and again, we improve quality and readability. Here's my example from yesterday and from lots of presentations I've given, if you weren't here. Let us say that we are developing some type of manual about this animal on the screen. We're going to develop a manual about caring for this animal. And there's 4 of us writing different topics. And one of us calls the animal a dog, and another one calls it a canine, and another one calls it a hound, and the other one calls it a puppy. And we have not standardized on what to call this animal. What we can have happen is that one person writes a topic on how to walk the dog, and someone is feeding the hound, and someone's training the canine, and we put all these topics together and we produce this output, and nobody understands what we're talking about, because is a hound the same thing as a dog? Is a dog and a canine the same thing? Canine, that's a complicated word. It doesn't matter which one you standardize on. I mean, I don't care. Just pick one. Whichever one you want, pick one and use it over and over and over again, because as we all know, the stuff we write about is far more complicated than caring about a dog. Not to say that that's not complicated. Mine's 90 pounds and he's very complicated. So how do we do this? How do we manage terminology? There are 2 ways to do it. One is using a flat file. It can be a spreadsheet. It can be a Word document. I have not seen it done in unstructured frame, but of course it could be a frame document. And the other is using a term base. If we use a flat file, often we create a spreadsheet that looks like this. We have the term that we want people to use, or the allowed term. We have the terms that people shouldn't use. We might have definitions or notes. If you're going to manage terminology this way, and lots of companies do, let me tell you from experience that the most important stuff you put into this spreadsheet are the terms that people shouldn't use. I cannot tell you how often I have gone into a customer's content and gone into their style guide and their term list, and I've seen a whole list of terms people are supposed to use. Here are the words we use. This is our term list. That's not enough. You need to put all the terms people should not use. Think about it. If I'm a writer and I'm about to use a word, and I'm not sure if that word is allowed or not, and I go to search for it in a flat file, if I do not find it, Does that mean it's not allowed? No. Just showing me an allowed term is almost meaningless. I must have the terms I'm not supposed to use, along with the terms I'm supposed to use instead. If you don't, you've made a fairly meaningless set of terms. So you heard it here. Of course, I prefer that we use technology to help us manage terminology. So I prefer us to use a term base. And when we have a term base, it's often hierarchical. It can be a single language, or it can be multilingual. And there's all kinds of information that we can put into a term base for each one of those terms that we're going to manage. Preferred terms, deprecated or disallowed terms, maybe terms that are allowed, but we would prefer you to use dog, but sometimes you might have to use puppy, right? Admitted terms, variants, metadata, part of speech, so many things that you can do if you manage your terminology in a term base. Later on, we'll see more about that. Now, how do I use terminology? There are two different ways to use terminology. I call one the pull method and the other the push method. In the pull method of managing terminology, we're not using tools. We probably have a spreadsheet or a table. So here's the way we work as a writer or an editor. I'm writing and I come upon that word, just like I said before, and I need to first think about whether or not this term is important. So I, the writer, have to figure out by I don't know what, whether or not a term is managed. Obviously, I can't think that every single word I'm using is managed, so hopefully someone's given me some pointers. The next thing I have to do is find the proverbial needle in the term haystack, which is where on earth is the term list. I got to find the list. And then I have to see if the term is in the list. And if the term is in the list, I have to see whether or not I'm allowed to use it, assuming that I have both my preferred terms and my disallowed terms. And then I can use the right term in my content. No one has time to do this. No one. It doesn't happen. It never happens. You can put 3 bazillion words into a spreadsheet and no one is ever going to have the time to look up all the terms. Just doesn't happen. I much prefer what I call the push method. The push method of using terminology is using software. And the software integrates into your authoring environment, and the software checks your terms, and it compares it to your term base. And if you use the wrong term, it actually gives you the correct term. You can drop it usually right into your document. It's fast. It's easy, it's consistent. Software never misses one because it's software. So push, pull. I prefer push so it's consistent and easy to use. Now, what's so important about grammar and what's so important about style? Why do we really care? Well, again, we want to be able to mix and match our components. That's for me one of the biggest things. How can you reuse components if they don't have the same grammar, style, and terminology? I don't get it. Standardizing your grammar and style eliminates the ambiguity. It improves the content. Again, enforces your brand, lowers the cost of everything, improves everything. Speeds time to market. Grammar is really important for accuracy and readability. Very important. Grammar includes lots of things. We have parts of speech, nouns, pronouns, etc. We have negation, couldn't, can't, could not, never, nothing, nobody, sentence structure, the order of your words, the tense. How often have you read a technical document that includes the past, present, and future tense in the same paragraph? I have. I'm raising my hand. Pick one. Always use the same. I prefer the present tense. Every now and then we have to incorporate past or future. But make sure that you have defined it, that you have defined how you're going to use grammar, and that people know what proper grammar is. Then we have style. So grammar are really the rules of writing in your language. Style are more intentional decisions that you've made, where a style might not be correct or incorrect. You just want to make sure it's consistent. So it's intentional. It's things that you think about. It helps writers from different places all sound the same. Again, it helps components to be reused. It makes things unified to have the same style. But here's the catch. Style rules assume that you're selecting from a set of grammatically correct options. If your grammar isn't accurate, it doesn't matter what style you're using. So first and foremost, you need to use correct grammar. And in this conversation, we're not talking about voice, but I will put in there, because it's important, and it came up yesterday, our fundamental relationship with our customer and how we address them in our writing has really changed over the 30 years that I have been in this business. When I started in the dark ages on FrameMaker 3, which was my very first and almost most beloved version of FrameMaker, 5 was actually at the time then. Now, of course, we're years past. So then we were very formal. We would use the user. We would never use a contraction. There was this association that if we spoke with very formal, multisyllabic words, that somehow all this new technology that we were writing about would be taken more seriously. Well, if you fast forward 30 years, what's happened today is that our writing has gotten so colloquial, so casual, that it really borders on inside jokes. That we're writing as if our customer is our new BFF, our new best friend forever. And that pendulum has swung too far, because in this writing, your grammar is usually not accurate. You're speaking in half sentences. You're speaking in phraseology that you have to be on the inside of the joke to understand. So I think it's really important, while we're talking about consistency and terminology and grammar and style, to all see that the best sentence structure is the simplest, accurate sentence structure. It's not your cheeky chummy. It's simple, it's accurate, it's accessible, it's translatable. No one gets confused. The key is to write content that everybody can understand. So usually we put all of this information into a style guide. Usually a style guide has your style rules and your grammar rules. Sometimes it contains your terminology. Sometimes it contains design components, design elements. I've seen style guides that talk about Pantone colors and where you can and can't use the logo and all of these things. Often those are more in your your graphic or marketing style guides, but I've seen them all together. Companies spend person hours, tons of hours creating their style guides. They write them out, they put in the details, they even update them from time to time, usually not as frequently as they need to, but they update them from time to time. But here's the dirty little secret. No one uses your style guide for the same reason that no one searches for terms in a spreadsheet. No one has the time. We're under pressure. We have to get our content out now. We don't have an extra 5 minutes to find the style guide and to look things up. We're given the style guide when we first get to a company, and maybe for the first 6 weeks, we're reading through it and we're using it and we're being diligent and, we're really, really caring. But 6 months later, it's all about getting product out the door. So you spend all this time creating your style guide and then nobody uses it. They want to. It's not that writers don't want to. They just don't have the time. And once again, there's really just one solution to managing your grammar, your style, and your terminology. And that's by automating all of it. And that's by using optimization software where you can configure your corporate style, the grammar you are using, the terms you are using. You configure this in your software. And then within your authoring environment, you run that software either as you're writing or you check it after you've written. Either way. But the main thing is no one has to remember anything anymore. It's all there for you. And again, software doesn't miss something. It's consistent. When software tells you you're wrong, there's no personalities involved. It's not like, oh my gosh, it's that editor with his red pen. And oh my gosh, if they don't stop marking everything, I'm just going to throw myself out a window. It's software. It's not personality. It's objective. It catches all of these types of errors. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to pass the torch of genius over to Torsten to talk more about how we do this. So Torsten, do you want to share your screen and take over?
I like that phrase, the torch of genius. Did we lose Torsten? He's muted right now in the presenters.
I think so. Yep.
There we go. Torsten, do we have audio on you? Might want to check your headset for a mute button. Val, do you have a way to text him or anything?
Let's see.
I'm going to look in the chat.
I think he's configuring it. I think that's what I saw.
Oh, Magda, I'm pretty sure Stefan is uttering German as we speak. He's just wise enough to be muted.
Let us know when you're ready. Let us know in the chat when you're ready, Torsten.
Yeah. I like your brackets. Hides head in shame.
You have no idea how hard people are on me when I make a mistake. I mean, not these people in the chat. I appreciate knowing, but ooh, if I have a typo in a blog post, things get very ugly very quickly.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Held to a higher standard, right?
I'll give him a quick call.
Yeah.
Hi, Torsten.
And I see that Sarah is
Genau, weil du den
waving and giving you some moral support there.
Screen geshared hast mit den Attendees und das ist privacy-mäßig verboten. Du hast den Browser mitgeshared, wo du als Presenter eingeloggt bist. Bist du denn soweit bereit im Fullscreen-Modus? Von PowerPoint jetzt, ja? Okay, pass auf, dass du das Browser-Window nicht sharest, weil da dann Attendee-Daten zu sehen sind, die Privacy, GDPR, bla bla bla. Ne? Dann unblocke ich dich jetzt wieder, ne? Okay. Dann kannst du jetzt sharen, ne?
Ja.
So Val, it looks like the fires are getting contained.
Okay, klick auf, ne?
Yes, they
Okay.
are. Hallelujah.
That's
Oh,
great news.
there we go.
Hey, we have him back. I just gave him a quick call and we sorted it out.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
We'll let him
Yeah.
come in with his audio.
So thanks, Val. Was excellent. So I take the torch then.
the torch of
So-
genius.
Yeah, torch of genius. I like that. So in the beginning that's the first sentence in the Gospel of St. John, and it reads, "In the beginning was the Word," but many people read it differently. They read, "In the beginning was Word," or WordPress, or WordStar, or Ventura Publisher, or OpenOffice, depending on your age. And that's what we call unstructured document. And what are the problems with unstructured documents? Well, they are unstructured, obviously. So all the structure, the styles that are being used are completely dependent by the user. So they can do whatever they wish. There's no control. There's no tool that checks, verifies what they do. If there is a predefined set of styles, users can even override them, make their own decisions and apply their own styles and their own tasting and their own liking, etc. And that's a problem. So everything depends basically on them, on their discipline, on their training, etc. Reuse is only possible by copying and pasting, and then you have to modify the styles, etc. That's a big problem. That's a big problem in big industries and technical communication in general. And that was the reason to invent something different. I'm a big fan of Monty Python's, and now for something completely different, and that's structured documentation. Let's talk a bit about the history of structured documentation and why structured documentation was important. Even you guys know it, but nevertheless, I would like to talk about it a bit. So in 1986, the ISO standard generalized markup language, HTML, was released. Some call HTML also sounds good maybe later, because it was a quite huge standard of 500 pages. The tools were quite expensive. It was only affordable for bigger companies or for geeks like me. So, but then in 1999, XML, the extensible markup language, was released, and there's only a 40 pages specification, and it made it easier to develop tools, especially parsers. A couple of new and very powerful and interesting content management systems emerged, and that made it possible to do something new, to harmonize the documentation processes, the content creation processes, and take control over the structures. And in HTML, we have some standard applications. I'm mentioning them because they are also available in XML. So DocBook in 1991, then S1000D, which was initially only being used in the defense industry in Europe, and then nowadays it's also being used in the civil aviation industry. The ISPEC 2200 for the maintenance documentation in the civil aviation industry, and in 2001, obviously, DITA, the first version of DITA, was released, and that was all great. Why? Now we had structured documentation, so the consistency, the structure of the documentation was no longer dependent on the author. There was a nasty tool still running behind the scenes. It's called Parser. This guy acts kind of big brother, checks what the author is doing, watches what he is doing, prevents things which are not allowed. You know everything. The good thing in DITA is special types of information have a special structure, and that's how we can make sure that we write consistent documents depending on the type of information we're writing. We can reuse content, we can reuse in a CMS, we can reuse topics, entire topics, create data maps, we can make references to certain fragments within a topic, all great. We can exchange information not only across companies, but also within the companies. So in many talks on DITA in the last couple of years, people were using the analogy of silos, information silos. And the big idea was to harmonize them, to unify them, to use this structured content not only in tech pubs, but also in marketing and sales and service and training, etc. Multi-channel was possible, not only to publish information onto paper and onto the web, into apps, but also on different types of paper formats, letter 4, 6, etc. And we can now do topic-based content creation. If you've ever tried to do that in Microsoft Word, then you know, like myself, that's really hell on earth. So a couple of years ago, I wrote a book of 400 pages, having 26 chapters, and I organized everything in separate Word documents. And at the end, I had to make it a book that took more time than to write those 400 pages. So you know what I'm talking. That's all great. And that's what how structured documentation, HTML-based and XML-based, and DITA really helped us to achieve those goals. So now we have consistent documents, we have consistent structures, and companies have invested a lot of money in developing structures, customizing DITA, developing style sheets, customizing style sheets, training all the content creators and authors. They have invested a lot of money in content management systems. That's all great. What I don't understand, and I would like to rephrase one of Val's sentences, I do not understand why those companies did not bring the documentation to the next level, because they were missing two pieces, or are still missing two pieces. Val was talking about them already. What about a consistent language? What about a correct and consistent terminology? What can we do with those two missing pieces in this puzzle? Well, we need to use a controlled language. Controlled language helps us to achieve consistency both in language and in terminology. A controlled language is a subset of a natural language defined by rules for grammar, style, spelling, and terminology. One of the most popular controlled languages is Simplified Technical English. Simplified Technical English is a specification, a standard defined by the ESD. And many people or companies use STE as a synonym for controlled language. And they say, well, yeah, we would like to use STE, but with German. or with British English. That's not possible. STE is American English. We will be using STE, but we will be activating additional rules or deactivating some of them. Well, that's not possible because that's a standard, and it's impossible as well to be slightly pregnant. The STE is STE, and everything else what you do for your company, for your goals, is a controlled language. There are plenty of them out there defined by bigger companies. In Germany, it was Siemens. They were, I think, the first company who developed their own controlled language. Skills for German. You're free to define your own control language to achieve your goals, to make your documents consistent in terms of language and terminology. So why controlled language? Val was talking about that. So I do not need to talk about that again. Some words about those aspects. Why is that important? Well, it has to do with cost. If the reader, the operator, the maintenance guy, the service technician does not understand correctly what the author was writing about, then he could do something wrong, could damage the machine, the equipment, the component. People could get hurt or even killed, and that will definitely have some legal aspects as well. If the language of the source documentation is not correct, if the terminology was not correctly used, it will definitely have an impact on the translation, on the quality of the translation as well, on the readability, the comprehensibility. So can a technical author, a technical communicator be creative, be stylish? And I know Val's opinion on that, and we share his opinion. No, technical documentation, technical communication is not about creativity. There might be a guy who is a big fan of this guy, William Shakespeare, and she might like his style and try to mimic this style in this documentation. And another one might be a big fan, like myself, of this guy, Mark Twain, try to mimic his style in the documentation. That's probably an interesting read, but not appropriate for the industry we are working in, for technical communication. Or another analogy, in a big software project, one engineer might think, I like Python, and the other one, I like C#, and one guy has developed his piece of code and using Python, and the other one in C#. That will not only end up in a mess, it will just not work. Language is the source of all misunderstandings. This is a quote from the Little Prince, and I want to tell you another story. So the other day I was talking to a startup company. They wanted to invent a completely new car, and they got a lot of venture capital along with a specification for this new car. And this is the specification. New car must have a modern design, must be carbon neutral, must be air conditioned, must consume renewable energy. And they came up with this. So when we talk about language and technology, Val was talking about that. We need to define a style guide. And a style guide defines everything we need, not only rules for style, spelling, and grammar and terminology. When we talk about XML structures and data structures, we can do even more. So we can define which styles are being used in which context or in which element. For different title elements, we would probably, or in a title element, we would probably not use punctuation. We would enforce the user to the imperative form of a verb. In a regular paragraph, we want to avoid passive voice or future tense. List elements, we would like to apply different styles, and in inline elements as well. That's what a style guide is about. So the question is, how can we remember everything? So a style guide can be a document of a couple of hundreds of pages. All the authors, content creators must know all those rules by heart. They must know everything about the terminology, how terminology is being used, in which context, what are the different usages, so which term is preferred term, which is a synonym, which is a deprecated form, which term is being used for what. Can we know everything? No, we can't. How can we cope with this issue? So we could hire an army of proofreaders, terminologists that check all the documentation. Quite expensive, not always doable. So Val was mentioning time to market. It's almost impossible. So we need to automate things. So we need to automate things to make sure that everything is checked at any time. And that's what we basically experience when we write documents using DITA. So there's a tool behind the scenes. I was already mentioning it, called Parser. And this guy does all the checks in real time. So this tool makes sure that we can produce only valid documents. Some companies have invested in some additional tools to do some formal checks, they do some checks for business rule, etc. But again, there's something missing, and that's checking language and terminology. And that's where software from Congree comes into play. Our flagship is called Congree Authoring Server, and it has got basically 3 building blocks. One is the component for the language checks, and this part of software does everything we need. So it checks for grammar, style, spelling, etc. The interesting part is nothing is hardwired, so everything is based on the configuration. And what the style guide Val was mentioning is basically mapped onto rules in Congree, activated, deactivated, sometimes parameterized. So what means parameterized? So one of the rules we have in the product is maximum length of or number of words in a sentence is 26. And if you feel that's way too much, then feel free to reduce it. Or 18, whatever you like. One sample. The second component is terminology management. So one of the big information silos nobody was caring about is the terminology management system. So I don't call it a silo, I call it a treasure. Companies have invested a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of effort in the terminology management system. And only a couple of people has access to this terminology management, so terminologists, translators, etc. So all the others, content creators, subject matter experts, technical writers, don't have access to the tool, don't know there is such a tool, or are too lazy to look into this tool, or don't have a license, or don't have the time to verify the terminology they have used in the document. So what we do is we basically push all the terminology into the editor. But anytime the author, the content creator can access the information coming from the terminology management system, you can understand in which context this term is allowed to use, which context isn't. The other component is we call term candidates. The question is always, how do we feed the terminology management system? There are a couple of ways. People write emails to the terminologist. There's a huge Excel list on a shared folder, and everybody is invited to add his 2 cents to this list. But nobody can take care of that because it's way too much. It's unorganized, it's unstructured, and that's where the term candidates can come into play. So if there is something in the document that we have found which looks like a natural candidate for the terminology management system, then we extract this term, and the author is free to propose this as a new term. And it's very important, what I just said, propose, not to store the terminology management system, because everything is about quality. And after that, it's up to the terminologists, the product managers, decide whether this term shall be stored in the terminology management system or not. And the third component is authoring memory. And authoring memory is about reusing existing sentences. So there's a difference between the reuse in XML and in DITA and in authoring memory. When a user wants to use a sentence in his topic and he thinks there might be a colleague that has already written this sentence, then he can try to find this sentence in the repository. If he doesn't have the time or is too lazy to do so, he will reinvent the sentence, or write a new sentence which is similar to the already existing one. The author memory, the author enters a couple of words. We try to find sentences that contain those words, and then we can select them and replace the words he has entered in his topic by the sentence he has picked from the list. So by this feature, we achieve basically consistency. We help accelerating the process of writing. And the other goal is we help the author to identify sentences which have already been translated. Because we don't want to write new sentences or similar sentences because they cause additional translation costs. By using sentences which have already been translated or which are very close to an already translated sentences, we help reducing translation cost and accelerating the translation process. And sometimes it's obviously necessary to modify an existing sentence. So if you say, tighten the 4 screws, that's a sentence in the author memory, and the author needs 6 screws, then obviously he is free to modify or replace 4 by 6 or 6 by 4. I can't remember what I just said. That's the goal. And in the authoring, this component is called Congree authoring memory. It's not called Congree dustbin, because we allow only sentences in this repository which are quality assured. Quality assured not by a person, but by the software. So the software will only allow to store sentences which are linguistically perfect, which are perfect in terms of terminology. So that's basically the missing piece. So I was mentioning editing tools, data customization, style sheets, content management systems, tools to check the consistency of a topic or an entire data map. But what's missing in many companies? Automatic checks for the language and the terminology. And that concludes this part of the presentation, and we are now happy to take your questions.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. Something in the chat.
We do have a number of questions in the Q&A pod. So if each of you would like to take a look at the Q&A pod, some of them are fairly specific. I think it's going to be easier to go ahead and read them on your own and perhaps address them.
Do you want them addressed now, or do you want the answers typed in?
I think it would be much more interesting to have you speak to these things rather than be limited by the speed of your keyboard.
You don't know how fast I type.
I didn't notice I said that without insulting your typing skills, rather your keyboard.
I try to talk. Well, would you like to start?
Yeah, I see this one. Does Val use something like Hyper S plugin to enforce all her, well, I know it was STE, but I didn't want to say it, to enforce all her style rules? Yes, I do. Guess what I use? I don't use HyperSTE, but I do use Congree. And in fact, anytime I launch any of my authoring environment apps, whether it's Frame or PowerPoint or whatever, Congree automatically launches as a plugin into my authoring environment. And we do have a content rules server, and we have our styles defined there. Obviously, I need to add term list to my terminology because obviously I had it both ways. But yes, I do.
So if you don't mind, I start answering the questions here from the beginning. So the other one, can you add pictures into the terminology? So the question is, can you add pictures, etc., into the terminology side of Congree authoring server? No, we don't do that. So we have no idea how to make a good user interface without messing up the user interface with huge drawings and pictures. What we do have is a link into the terminology management system. Then, so if you want to get more information, then the link there. So is Congree authoring server in Congree authoring server? How does it connect to an authoring tool? So we have plugins. So we have plugins for a couple of tools for the vast majority of all XML tools and all the Office tools, and a couple of other tools, ERP systems, PDM systems. And they integrate integrated into those applications. So the question is, never can we integrate, or is our plugins able to be integrated into the tools? Yes, they are, if those host applications provide an interface to do so. So it's quite simple. To provide the slides, Stefan, I don't know how I'm happy to share my slides. There was a name, who answered this, so asked these questions. You can find me on LinkedIn if you want, and then I can send you the slides if you're interested in them.
Yeah, please send. There was a deadline when people should have sent in their slides.
I'm sorry. I was on a vacation. I was enforced to do. I'm sending it to you, Stefan.
Yeah, please send them to me. We make them available in a central location.
Excellent. Do you recommend using constraints and DITA to allow writers to select only the elements that you allow? I mean, that's not a question to us. That's more to all the different tools within a DITA environment. Does Val use something like HyperSTE plugin?
Yep, I answered that one.
Excellent.
All right, there's another one up at the top. Yep. Can you carry reference links for graphics instead of incorporating graphics themselves? I don't think I understand the question.
It's more a question to DITA in general.
Yeah, it's not a question.
Of course you can do that. I mean, you would in an XML. There are cases where you put the graphics binary into an XML document. There are some reasons or some use cases to do so, but in our industry, in tech docs, you would make just a reference, and then it's up to the editor. I mean, this is an Adobe session, so we should be mentioning FrameMaker. So FrameMaker would resolve this link and render the graphic. Some other questions? Do you want to marry me? No, that was another chat. Sorry.
That was a different window, Torsten.
Yes, I know. Sorry about that.
Talking about
screen share.
Yeah. I'm happy I did not share the wrong screen. So that's an interesting question here. How much of your time spent running this system, and how much do you authoring content?
I think you may be getting into the previous session.
Yeah, that's the previous one. Yes, good.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
It's pretty much it. Yeah.